So I think we're going to get started. Appreciate everyone taking a little bit of time out of their Friday to speak with me about one of my favorite subjects, startups, specifically information technology startups, and how we bring products to market. And with a whole lot of luck, somehow get acquired, because that's a weird thing. I'm going to start off being a little bit vulnerable with you guys for a second. I've been doing public speaking for around 10 years, on and off. Most of them have gone pretty well. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to speak in front of my entire company on high-performance best practices and almost blacked out. It was really bad, like really, really bad. I think the culprit was likely a combination of low blood sugar, a lot of stress over the last 2 years and working in 10 different time zones, and the fact that I probably subconsciously wanted to impress a lot of people that I knew. But it was a bad experience. We're in Denver, so I'm hoping this is a little bit of a safe space, and if I do drop to the floor, you guys can just pull me over to the side, put a little blanket on me, a little bowl of water I can lap, and you guys get to start your Friday a little bit earlier. So before we get started, I wanted to share a little bit about my background. I specialize in taking new technologies to market. I've done this for a number of companies and sold the very first product at 3 separate companies. My background traverses everything from automation and virtual desktop infrastructure to more recently machine learning and cybersecurity. I've sold enterprise software to a number of large banks, every defense contractor, and a number of entities within the DoD, including the State Department, FBI, and CDC. Currently a tech mentor for our wonderful local accelerator, Boomtown, out of Boulder. And one of the startups I work with just got their first round of funding. I'm very proud of them. Company's called MindPass. Be on the lookout for them. They're taking a really unique stab at the passwordless world so many vendors are going after by leveraging 3D modeling and an iteration of the concept of a memory palace. So good guys over there. In my spare time, I advise for a lot of startups. I really enjoy giving back to the community. And right now, working with startups that are disrupting the traditional venture capital model to companies that are working on different ways for us to buy furniture and recycled devices. I've also spent much of the last years ruminating on and reflecting on what I would call technology ethics, specifically the attention economy and what's happening with machine learning and AI-based technologies and automation, specifically around job displacement. If that's a topic that interests you, we should definitely grab coffee sometime because I could talk about that stuff for hours. In my spare time outside of Ping, I spend a lot of time rock climbing and highlining. That's kind of my visceral form of meditation. So if that's of your interest as well or you want to get into it, would love to chat. I currently work for Ping Identity, which IPO'd yesterday on the New York Stock Exchange. Yeah, which is pretty crazy. Yeah, blows my mind. It happened very fast. So I worked for a small startup that they acquired last year, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, we're going to go back in time to the day that I joined this small company, and this is what the website looked like. This was our homepage, and little did I know, roughly 5 months from then, we would launch from stealth, and subsequently 10 months later, we would be acquired by one of the top security companies in the world, Ping Identity, located here in Denver, Colorado. Now, I was the 12th and last hire. There were 9 engineers and data scientists out of Bangalore, a CEO, a head of product, and me. I'm still baffled I got the job because when I started, I knew nothing about APIs or cybersecurity. That's a story for a different time, but funny nonetheless. Before we buckle up for this ride, I really want to paint a picture of the space we were trying to disrupt so you can understand where we were at. So quick poll for the audience. Raise your hand if you know what an API is. Raise your hand, or keep your hand raised if you know why APIs are eating the world. Okay, about half the audience. Well, I'll give you a quick crash course. APIs are the reason the easy button has manifested itself into almost every aspect of our digital lives, and why interactions with devices and applications are becoming increasingly seamless. They're the reason when you search for flights on Google Flights or Expedia, you can get instant queries of all the latest information. It's the reason you can track where your Uber driver is. Simply put, they are the reason why software applications can talk to each other and the foundation to so many different enterprise integrations. APIs are core to any digital transformation initiative, and almost all future value organizations will offer their customers and partners will be routed through them. At the same time, they're the perfect dichotomy for InfoSec professionals. As InfoSec professionals, information security professionals, we wake up every day trying to limit access to data and systems. Digital transformation initiatives powered by APIs do the antithesis of that. This was a massive market that we wanted a piece of. I think these numbers are actually from last year, but Salesforce now has over 50% of its revenue being driven through APIs. Amazon's is growing substantially as well. Shopify is closing in on its millionth business using their platform, which is 100% API driven. Just a few months after we surfaced from stealth, Gartner came out with a quote and said definitively that in 2022, API abuse will be the most frequent attack vector for data breaches. The timing was looking pretty good. Over the past few years, we've seen a formidable increase in not only the sophistication, but velocity of cyber attacks on APIs. How many people followed the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal? No. The culprit? An API. Cambridge Analytica was a trusted partner of Facebook. They had access to that API, and they ended up taking 70 million Americans' private information and then created custom digital personality profiles for each one of us and identified which Americans were most susceptible to having their opinions changed. T-Mobile, one breach in the last year, one abuse. Google announced earlier this year that the Google Plus social network, that one that just your weird uncle uses, and that's it, had an ongoing breach for 3 years on their API. After they announced this, they shut down and end-of-life the platform. This was a problem. And it's not that these organizations didn't have the resources and tooling for securing their APIs or weren't doing API security. In fact, quite the contrary was the case. Many of them were following the API security best practice checklist that was provided by Gartner and the other vendors in the space. Now, I've spent much of the last 2 years speaking with CISOs and CIOs, and oftentimes start off by saying that, do you know who is equally, do you know who is equally as excited about digital transformation initiatives around APIs? Hackers. Russian hackers, Chinese hackers, American hackers, criminal cyber networks alike view APIs as virtual buffets. I'm gonna take a little bit from here, I'm gonna take a little bit from there, and then I'm out. Now raise your hand if you're a Venmo user. You guys like that app? It's my favorite app because it rendered obsolete that one friend we have that would always forget their wallet when we went out. And then you don't have to deal with that anymore. Now, how many changed the default privacy setting from public to private when you downloaded Venmo? Huh? Good on you. I gotta go here again. So did you know that Venmo offers a public API? Someone, and I love this person so much, started a website where they live streamed all of the illicit activity that was happening on Venmo with keyword searches. So I can actually go in and like that Summer bought mushrooms from Arian, probably for Burning Man or Coachella. Now, this is a talk about go-to-market strategies, and we will get there, but it's important for you all to digest the negative externalities and positive of this API-driven economy that's opening up the world. I think it will likely be one of the defining issues of our time with privacy when historians look back. I see some of you checking your Venmos now. You should probably change that setting, or you could troll internet FBI agents, and next time you get some avocado toast and a nitro cold brew, just do the mushroom chocolate emoji sign and call it a day. Just plain. So, go-to-market strategies. Now that you all have a vivid picture of the market we were trying to disrupt and wanted a piece of, let's first review some of the very basics of crafting a go-to-market strategy. A go-to-market strategy is typically associated with the launch of a new product or company. Building this strategy should not be a static in-point time event, but rather something purposely malleable. As you get new information back from customers, the market, your competitors, you should be iterating on that continuously. When we launched from stealth mode, we had one competitor at the time, and we both had 0 paying customers. We knew we were not replacing anything, and that mainly we would be augmenting the important foundational security provided by a number of other vendors, namely authentication, web application firewall vendors, and API management. Our ICP, or ideal customer profile, was large, complex enterprises that had robust API-based initiatives to modernize. We knew that these organizations had the most risk, the most to lose, and if anyone was going to be receptive to our nuanced behavioral security message, it was going to be them. From a buyer perspective, it was actually quite unclear who that was going to be in the beginning. We both knew API teams and security teams alike would be interested, but we were unsure on whose budget we were going to pull from and who the actual practitioners were going to be. Hold on a second, just moving this up. Okay. This was a pretty nuanced thing that we spent a lot of time thinking about, and I won't get into the details, but the main takeaway here is don't be so certain of who your buyer is and constantly be taking in new data sets as you are evolving your ICP. So, value prop and messaging. These large organizations were almost always following the industry standard best practices for API security, right? It's not like they weren't doing it. We just did it in a different, nuanced way, and we needed to articulate that to them. So our value prop, in short, and I'll give it to you, promise you I'm not trying to sell you software right now, was essentially this. API attacks were increasing by both sophistication and velocity, and most API attacks today were going undetected. And that's because these attacks were coming from authenticated users or hackers who have reverse engineered your API. By building per API behavioral models, can you understand and distinguish between what is good traffic and bad traffic on your APIs? And then and only then can you get insight to what's happening after authentication has occurred. And we can help your organization distinguish between that good traffic and bad traffic. It iterated to that over time, but that's basically the gist of what we were working with. And then lastly, how are you going to sell it? So you really have 4 options here. You could sell direct and spend some money on some expensive outside sales reps. They're worth it, the good ones. You could go to market via a channel, of course. This can be difficult, but if you hire someone who has a robust channel network, they can be quite deadly for your organization. You could go to market with tech alliances, which I'll get into. Finding an install base you can target is absolutely crucial. Or you can OEM. So this is an important one. Don't look like a startup. Now, we were basically 12 dudes in a garage. No VC backing, it was all private money, but that was a huge red flag. And our ideal customer profile was the largest, most complex businesses in the world that were notoriously risk averse. There's a well-known saying in enterprise IT departments, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. IT decision makers get fired every day for investing in the wrong technologies, and no one wants to be the big guinea pig, let alone your first customer. Who knows where your startup's going to be in 6 to 9 months if that other next round of funding comes in, or what happens to your company. We're all also very familiar with the Silicon Valley mantra of fake it till you make it, right? And there's a certain validity and importance of incorporating this paradigm thinking into everything you do. But you want to be truthful and ethical, and you don't want to lie. We're all very acutely aware and understood and saw what happened in real time with Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. You shouldn't lie, but you could definitely stretch the truth a little bit. That being said, your first customer is always the most difficult, really the first 3, but rarely do people want to be the first. On LinkedIn, we had 12 people, and there were 12 people in our company, but I knew we had a number of advisors and investors, and so I spoke with our CEO and got every single one of them to add themselves to LinkedIn. And overnight, we were a 30-person company with 0 customers and 0 revenue. That actually makes a difference. That may sound trivial and silly, but I promise you, if you're selling to big customers, they don't want to work with startups because there's a huge risk in doing business with you. So how do you prep for a launch? Well, you expose yourself, and I mean that quite literally. Everyone and their mother has a killer new AI-powered insert Gartner Magic Quadrant buzzword thingy startup they want to tell you about. People do not want to hear this message from you, rather from the people that they love and respect in the community. We had a press list of over 100 contacts, and we sent individually crafted emails to each of them, explaining the space we were entering, the problem we were trying to solve, coupled with the understanding of that person's background. We were really intentional of targeting the people in the tech and security community that would be receptive to this message and that had the clout that we needed. Become an expert. I would read 2 to 3 blogs every day and try to skim at least 2 to 3 white papers a week, and was constantly looking for data points and new bits of messaging that I could iterate on and that would resonate with our customers and partners. Establishing credibility and crowd and finding the influencers are also really important, and we'll get into that. So I had an acute problem on my hand. Because I had never worked in cybersecurity or APIs, I had close to 0 network in that, to what I thought was a pretty formidable network at the time. I needed to change this in quickly. After diving into the cybersecurity community, I found out it was actually quite multidimensional and massive. There were 7 different layers of security, each one nuanced in its own way, an array of expertise and experiences that were required to understand just one. After looking into the API community, I found, conversely, that it was quite different. There were around 100 people in the world that really mattered in this community. In fact, there was a Slack channel where these 100 people spoke. I quickly identified the top 20 and knew that I needed to become friends with all of these people. Here are the top 4, and I was committed to becoming friends with them. So David Berlin was the editor-in-chief of Programmable Web, which was the leading source for all things APIs at the time. Ken Lane was the API evangelist. A lot of people described him as the dad of the API community and just an all-around great guy. Matt McCartley was the president of the API Academy at CA Technologies at the time and wrote the book on microservices. He was one of the most well-respected and well-known people in microservice and API architecture. And lastly, Alan Glickenhaus, who was IBM's API evangelist. He would later go on to write a blog announcing our partnership with IBM, which became his most well-viewed blog of the last 3 years. Press time. This was actually quite fun. Now, the guy David, who was the editor-in-chief of Programmable Web, would not commit to letting us review his write-up before it went out. We were a bit nervous about this. We had no idea what to expect, and when it came out 4 days after we announced from stealth, I was actually with the core team, the CEO, and had a product out in the valley. We immediately stopped what we were doing and read it. Given the evolving range of threats, it may not be until an equally autonomic API security solution hits the scene to entrust those given API security can give any sleep at night, inelastic beam. This piece of press would change the directory of our company. Gartner. They're a blessing and a curse. And there certainly is a partial pay-to-play dynamic in working with these guys. 2 startups before this, we had a small testing software startup, and we got Gartner to commit in writing that we were the de facto industry standard for testing. We were paying them, I think, $30K a year, and that was a game-changing moment. And we put together a formidable marketing campaign with that language. And that changed the directory of that company. Most startups do not have money to deal with Gartner, and Gartner does not care about most startups. Now, we knew we were not going to be able to get a quote from Gartner because A, we didn't have the money, and B, they don't care. But we did know that many of the top tech voices, specifically in the industry we're trying to disrupt, go to Gartner for advice when they do blogs or when they discuss the industry. So we identified all the ones that had gotten quotes from the Gartner Magic Quadrant VP, Mark O'Neill. And we targeted those. And we were fingers crossed hoping that they would reach out. And they did, and Gartner gave us a glowing endorsement. And I put together a marketing campaign with all of that language, and that immediately established a little bit of clout for the 12 dudes that were working in the garage on this company. This was a big win for us, and still is today. So when you're inventing a new space from scratch, which is what we were doing, you have to educate the buyers and surrounding practitioners on why the heck they need this new nuanced thing that you're selling them. Ken Lane, the API evangelist, as I said, is the dad, and he was the perfect man for this job. Ken had a website called theapievangelist.com where he typically blogged 2 to 3 times a week talking about the nuance of the API economy, sharing best practices, tips and tricks, and his thoughts on the vision. He was actually an advisor to the Obama administration on the open API industry. We paid him a few $1,000s, and he committed to writing a white paper called The Evolving API Threat Landscape. And this also was fundamental in establishing the clout we needed to become a startup that was worth our salt. Now, this piece of literature was meant to educate people on the risks of exposing APIs, aka scare them so they would be interested in buying our software. We purposefully left out any language about our product and just discussed the landscape itself. And I think that was really important to do. So this is a big one, target an install base. I can't stress this enough. For us, it was API gateway vendors. For you, it may be something different. Almost all of the gateway vendors had been acquired by big tech companies, and every cloud vendor had their own API management solution. It was a massive market. These API gateway vendors had robust policy engines, which were really great and natural integration points. So we knew we didn't have the time or resources to integrate with all of them, so we had to make bets on a few and hired a contractor to build this integration. Now, one of the components of our software could sit in front of any APIs as an ultra-late reverse proxy, but that would require organizations to change their architecture. And that was really a non-starter, we realized quite quickly, for any organization that was interested in our unique solution. So this integration allowed organizations to be able to deploy our technology without making any network or architectural changes, and that was game-changing. Today, we integrate with all, I believe, except one of these gateway vendors. I would really encourage you all to spend a bit of time if you're ruminating on a product idea or if you're starting a company on an install base to target, and then really understand the nuance of that install base, right? Understand who the A players are, who the has-beens are, who are the incumbents. Now, your first instinct is going to be to partner with the A players, right? They have the money, but all their sales reps are 180% the quota, and they're not going to want to partner with you. The best is the best for a reason. They don't need to partner with other organizations. So I would encourage you to look for the incumbents that are really agile, or maybe a legacy vendor. So some of the big ones that are out there that are maybe losing their install base to some of the second generation players, and see if there's a way to formulate your value prop so that they can combat the A players. We did just this, and it proved to be very successful. Oftentimes that can expedite a formal partnership and an actual go-to-market strategy with a technology alliance vendor, bringing your product into the install base of another one. So, first customer. We closed our first customer 5 months after surfacing from stealth in late November of 2017. Remember that article that David Berlin wrote that said, "Enter Elastic Beam"? That article found its way into the head of platform management at a large Fortune 100 company. He then reached out for a trial request on our website, and 4 months later, I was able to allocate some leftover budget, and we closed a formidable 6-figure deal, prepaid for 2 years. That deal led to the acquisition by Ping Identity. I was actually on a climbing trip in Moab with my brother at the time, and I got up for a call at 8 a.m., I realized I didn't have service and had to go to the top of the mountain. Keep in mind, this is November in Moab, so I think the temperature was 27 degrees when I got the verbal that this company was going to buy. And then you get acquired. It's that easy, guys. Come on. Of course, I'm being facetious. In the majority of iterations within the multiverse, we did not get acquired. If I would have started this company, same product, same pitch, everything, we would not have been acquired. The founder and CEO's clout was unprecedented even in the Valley. He was 7 for 7 for either being a turnaround specialist, building a new company from scratch, or taking a new product to market. He actually figured out in his early days how to isolate the browser from the web, and he sold that technology to Google, and that technology became Chrome. His clout is one of the main reasons we got acquired. The other co-founder started the Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for API management, Apogee, which was acquired 2 years earlier for $500 million by Google. A lot of it, unfortunately, is political in that sense. So what could we have done better? The beautiful thing about hindsight, right, is it's perfectly 2020. When I reflect back on this, it seems quite obvious. So during stealth mode, I think it would have served us really well to really do some focus groups, specifically getting the 2 different teams we knew we were targeting, API security teams and API management teams, into a room to fully understand the product gaps and understand the dashboards that were missing and their current ecosystem. The founders were able to get away without doing this because they're really smart, but they didn't nail everything. The second one would be better demo. I would give our demo as a startup a B at best. A, it was a really difficult product to demo, and the machine learning engine needed time to be trained, and we did not detect attacks instantaneously. It would have been worth our while and our patience and our money to spend more time working on a more visceral and sexy demo. And finally, more time on the UI. Now, you don't want to sell vaporware, and the core code behind your product, that working and actually being able to detect attacks is very important. But I think you could craft a pretty formidable argument that the UI and the way the product demos is equally, if not more important than the product itself. So a few things to watch out for. It's important to perpetually remind yourself that you are the person that wants this product to work out more than anyone else in the world. So combating confirmation bias is something you should keep a keen eye out for. It's a difficult skill set to cultivate, but being able to distinguish between what is noise and what is signal is a salient attribute that makes for a killer entrepreneur who can move fast, innovate, and take market share away from larger tech companies. And the last one's depression. The good and bad days are so frequent and unpredictable that you often feel bipolar at times. The Airbnb founders maxed out 10 credit cards and were turned down by dozens of investors, 3 of them living in a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. They were at rock bottom much of the time they were building that company. It's a tough journey, and it's really important to stay close to those that you care about and do things that you find joy in, whether that's being outside and climbing or bike riding or reading a good book. And I really encourage you to do that. So how are we doing today? Well, the company that acquired us IPO'd yesterday. We're up 30%. That's pretty cool. We're doing okay. We've won a number of awards, and it feels nice that we've been validated on building a new space. 2 weeks ago, Gartner released a report on the state of API security, specifically discussing the pure play vendors, which there's now 5, and marked us as the very first company to build this space and the only one that's been acquired. So what didn't we cover? We didn't talk about this because it wasn't really relevant to building our startup, but documentation is so important. I know a number of companies and sales reps who have lost a number of deals because their documentation was subpar. Especially if you're selling to a developer-oriented audience, it needs to be world-class. If you want something to compare it to, I would recommend Twilio, a new startup called Lob that one of my friends is helping build, or Shopify. If your documentation stands up to theirs, ask someone else, then you're worth your salt there. So 4 takeaways. Timing. Timing is absolutely crucial. You can be too early or too late, and the company will fail. Hyper-focus on the ICP first, second, and third. If others want to buy your product, that's great, but you need to be relentless about marketing only to the ICP and not waste your time when customers approach you that fall outside of that or require integrations that you don't have. I can't tell you how many entrepreneurs fail at this and how difficult it is, especially when you're so passionate about a product or service, to do this relentlessly. Find the influencers and establish clout. People do not want to hear about the product from you. A guest blog post or a tweet by an industry influencer for a blog you wrote can go a long way. And lastly, be relentlessly curious and seek serendipitous opportunity. In other words, make your own luck. When I reflect back on some of the successes that I've had in my life, I attribute to much of it to being relentlessly curious about not only the world around me, but the society and people that are near to me, as well as being curious about why a customer may have a specific pain point. By doing this, you are able to be in a unique position to uncover truths that have yet to be uncovered yet, and that is how you innovate. So that was my presentation. Hopefully that was interesting and insightful in maybe one or two ways. I'd like to conclude and do a little bit of an interactive Q&A. So if you guys have questions to the presentation, that's great. If you guys want to engage the audience, I think that would be better, and maybe we can make some networking connections out of this.